Hey folks, how's it going? I hope everybody had a great Christmas slash Kwanzaa slash Hanukkah slash New Year slash any combination of. So today's video is going to be on free speech. The first thing I'm going to be discussing is my thoughts on the controversy between Netflix and Saudi Arabia in the last few days. And I'm also going to be discussing my thoughts on the shift in the sources of censorship in the last 10 years or so, which I found really interesting, especially having attended a university. So let's get started. A few days ago, it was reported in the news that Patriot Act, which is a series on Netflix by Hasan Minhaj, had an episode in which Hasan Minhaj was critical of the Saudi crown prince censored inside of Saudi Arabia. Netflix has since confirmed that Saudi Arabia's Communications and Information Technology Commission had requested the removal due to violations of the kingdom's anti-cybercrime law. Apparently, Netflix anticipated some backlash to this decision, so they issued an additional statement saying that while they support artistic freedom, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia had filed a valid legal request, and they were complying with that request. So between the incident with Jamal Khashoggi, which I covered in a previous video, and this most recent round of suppression of views critical to the Saudi crown prince, I think it's fair to say that Mohammed bin Salman was not the great reformer that people in the West thought he might be or hoped he might be. Letting women drive and opening movie theaters in Saudi Arabia for the first time in 30 years is a wonderful step. But I think it's fair to say that liberalization of Saudi Arabia is a long way off, and the Crown Prince is probably not going to be the great liberalizer that some people in the West were hoping for. So I'm going to take the video in a slightly different direction now, still in the vein of free speech, but I want to talk about the shift that we've been seeing in the last little while in the sources of censorship. The stereotypes in the 60s and 70s were that the universities were places of free speech and free thought and the free marketplace of ideas. That this is where the good ideas would rise to the top because all ideas were being heard no matter how radical they were, and the good ones would prosper and the bad ones would die. But it seems to me now that universities are increasingly becoming places where free speech is being more and more restricted. I'm thinking specifically about cases involving Milo Yiannopoulos and Ben Shapiro recently in the last year or 2 years. I may not have the timeline perfect on that. I can put links in the description down below to those instances. But essentially, controversial speakers were being invited by the universities to speak, and then they were receiving such backlash by what I'm calling a radical left pushback, because Milo and Ben were right-wing in their thinking, and that's why they were invited, because they are, or they could be described as radical right-wing thinkers. And the universities caved to pressure from within the university to prevent these people from speaking on campus because it was becoming dangerous and people were becoming violent. I believe it was the Milo Yiannopoulos incident where protesters actually became violent. So they prevented these people from speaking. And that's a profoundly dangerous idea, especially on a university campus where free speech and radical ideas should have been or should be most freely expressed. I should point out that most of what Milo Yiannopoulos or Ben Shapiro talk about, I do not support. But I think, even if you disagree with their point of view, you should be intellectually capable of countering their ideas instead of preventing them from presenting their own. If you need to use violence to stop somebody from speaking, you need to examine your own ideology and the way you think about things. If you can't argue with somebody And if you are so afraid of somebody that you can't allow them to present a point of view, that's a problem. I understand the idea that bad ideas can become radical and dangerous all the time. I get that. But if a university shuts down one side of a debate, first of all, it gives legitimacy to the idea that can propagate that there is a group out there that is being suppressed, and that gives their ideas legitimacy and helps them gain ground. I tend to be extremely lenient in terms of the free speech versus hate speech debate. In my personal opinion, whether or not, for example, you're making a speech that's saying that women are inferior, or black people are inferior, or Jewish people are inferior, or Muslim people are inferior, I am comfortable letting you say those things. Where I think it crosses into hate speech is when you are actually advocating violence against those groups. And I realize that opens the door to a debate about the definition of violence, and that can be a topic for another video, but I think I tend to be fairly liberal on the free speech versus hate speech conversation. I tend to think that people can say whatever they like as long as they're not advocating hurting anybody else. However, I also think that a counter-argument should be just as freely available as something that's saying black people are less than white people, or women are less than men somehow. I think it's important to have access to every point of view, no matter how radical, and make up your own mind, as opposed to having an institution decide what can and cannot be accessed, which argument can and cannot be accessed. I think it's probably fair to say that, historically speaking, for the bulk of history regarding free speech conversations, censorship has come from the right wing, and universities and left-wing institutions have been champions of free speech, and for some reason the left wing is losing that and becoming a lot more repressive, which is a very strange thing. I think it's still more free. University campuses are still probably one of the freest places in terms of radical ideas. For example, during a recent election, I was approached by somebody campaigning on behalf of the Communist Party of Canada and asked me if they could count on my vote. I said no, but I don't think there's any place that the Communist Party of Canada could recruit comfortably, aside from a university campus, maybe a labor union. But I found it really interesting that the left wing seems to be losing its ability to have radical conversations and uncomfortable conversations. Anyway, guys, I think that's all I've got for you for this video. Thanks for listening. You can check out the links for everything I've discussed in the description down below. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Take care, guys.